I do appreciate your company and that you are joining me here for this very short presentation. I want to say right up front, you need to know my background. I have been in this industry for 2 years. I joined Brains Bioceuticals 2 years ago. Prior to that, I was a pharmaceutical executive. So I was a senior vice president for a biotech company called Biogen in the USA. I managed their neurology business, about $7 billion worth of business. And then prior to that, I was the managing director in the UK and Ireland for the same company. And I was also the chairman of the industry group. So I worked with the Prime Minister and the industry. I was the industry chair for the group to try and bring about healthcare reform. So this just played right into that in terms of developing the science and also changing the political landscape for us to make sure that patients get access to these incredible treatments. So what I want to do is to just start. For those of you who don't know Brains Bioceuticals, we are an evidence-based and a science-led company, all right? And so for me, that is quite critical. Knowing my background, you're now not surprised by that. And, you know, we are an API producer. One of the parts of our business is we produce API. And the reason for that is that we want to make sure that scientific studies are not compromised because of inconsistency within the API, or that they meet the criteria that is required for a clinical study, which is GMP, and you've got to have a DMF and all of those type of things. That is so important because, you know, I get saddened, and I'm sure some of you will be able to relate to this, how many failed studies are emerging at the moment. And it's failing not because the drugs don't work, not because cannabis or the cannabinoids don't have a role to play in treating some of these diseases. It's failing because the studies are poorly designed, or because we haven't done double randomized placebo-controlled studies, you know, so people can compare what the true benefit is. So, you know, I'm excited about this space. As somebody in this industry, I've researched the data before coming into the sector. Thank you for welcoming me in. And you know what you see over and over again. These are 2 landmark studies that were done, reviews, and one by the NIH in the USA, and the other one here in the UK. But the conclusion was the same. If we could learn how to modulate the endocannabinoid system, we could potentially find solutions for every major disease that humans are facing at the moment. The other thing that we're starting to see is that there is the emergence of really exciting new targets. So we tend to think of cannabis or cannabinoids in the realm of CB1 and CB2 receptors. But I'm also really excited about the fact that it works on other pathways. Why is that important? If you look at migraine, for example, we know that CBD works on your CB receptors, but it also works on your calcitonin gene-related peptide pathway. Now, that's where all your triptans work at the moment. So if you have something that works on 2 major pathways, potentially you could have something that is more beneficial than what is currently available, or you could have something for those that aren't responding to triptans that could benefit from cannabis-based or cannabinoid-based treatment. So really excited about that. However, the reality is there's only 3 approved drugs on the market. So a lot of activity in this space, you know, clinicaltrial.gov, there's over 1,000 clinical studies there. But I think we as an industry need to potentially do better. And I know that a lot of you are in the area of medical cannabis. I'm really grateful for that. But, you know, medical cannabis at the moment, from my home country, which is the UK, you know, at the moment, only about 1% of patients that could benefit from medical cannabis or cannabinoid type treatments are getting access to it. Why it is so difficult? You know, you've got to be a specialist, you've got to have a license, you've got to be certified, you've got to have all of these things. And every single country is different. But there's still a lot of hurdles that one has to go through in order to give patients access to this. So if we're serious about giving patients access to it, then, you know, insanity tells me that doing the same thing but expecting a different result is a little bit ludicrous. So that's why we're trying a new path at Brains Bioceuticals. And, you know, what we're trying to do is to really look at drug development. I've come from, as I say, from a pharmaceutical background. So if you can't change the rules, play by the rules. That's what I sort of say. And we are looking at all elements of due diligence in terms of developing product for this market. So, starting with good API, as I said, you've got to show something that any treatment that you bring to the market has to be better than the current standard of care. It's got to be commercially viable. So, if you're comparing yourself to a genericized market, it most probably isn't going to be worth the investment. You've got to formulate it because patents are so important in the pharmaceutical industry if people are going to invest millions into that. And then design the studies properly so that you can have measurable outcomes and measurable endpoints. So just a little bit about that. This is just an example. This is not an advertisement for brains, but just the lengths that we need to go to in order to pursue this path. So the very first thing is you've got to make sure that you meet all the specs of ICHQ7. And you can see that as an example, our CBD, 98 to 102, the impurity levels are less than 0.15. THC is undetectable, 0.00004%. You've got to have consistency. You've got to be compliant with ICHQ7. You've got to be compliant with the German pharmacopoeia. You've got to have stability data, toxicology data. We've got all of that. All right? And over and above that, you've got to walk the talk. You've got to do the studies, and we've got a drug master file. And we also got an R&D element. So we're looking at THC delta 9, we're looking at CBN and CBG. Why? Because that review paper that I showed you, that's where the science is going at the moment. Those are the cannabinoids that scientists and researchers are looking at. And I think part of where the industry is going is potentially being able to bring different cannabinoids together and to formulate them in a way. So, we know that CBD together with CBN is better than any of those two agents on their own for things like anxiety and insomnia. So, being able to combine them, so take the isolates, combine them and reformulate them is a key step in where we're going. We've just enlarged our facility so that no surprise, our facility is the old Pfizer facility in the UK in Sandwich. So, once again, the pharmaceutical connection, we've just enlarged it to make sure that we can meet demand for both today and tomorrow, because so many studies, as they progress into phase 3 and the volumes increase, people can't meet those increased in demand. So we wanted to make sure we were ready for that. And then we are in partnership with DSM-Firmenich, which is a world leader pharmaceutical company in the area of formulation. And why that is important is we know that cannabinoids are broken down with your first pass metabolism. And so, the bioavailability of cannabinoids is low. And so we need to make sure that we can formulate these drugs in different ways that we can increase the loading, increase the stability, as well as increase the bioavailability. So we're doing that together with our partners. And, then the next step is for us to make sure that we do the clinical studies. And I just wanted to leave you with this one little thing. So this is one of our partners that we are supporting in Philadelphia. And this was a study, it's preclinical, so please be aware that it's preclinical, not clinical. But this excites me. And this is one of the leading causes of death if you've got cancer, melanoma, and the other one is in lung cancer. The other, in the top 3 causes of death if you get these forms of cancer. And the fact that CBD, that this is in a nano formulation, has been shown to reduce tumors in this cancer, as well as prolong life, is incredibly exciting. These are powerful therapeutics, and I'm absolutely privileged to be part of this. And actually, I love that last question. Like, Terry, why did you join this industry, and why are you doing what you're doing? And I think for me, it's all about that we leave the world in a better place. That, because of our presence, that we're making things better. And even once we've moved on into other things, that impact lasts. And, I think one of the speakers said, you guys are changing the landscape. You guys are game changers, history makers. And I'm really grateful to be part of this group as we go and navigate and pioneer this new area and make a difference in the world, particularly for patients. So thank you for your time. Oh, there we go. Is there a question? Yeah. 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 Sure. Okay, so the question is, do we do acid forms and do we do them in a formulation that is stabilized? So once again, the research is really excited around some of the acid forms, all right? At this current stage, we don't. Would I like to get into that area? Absolutely. And I think you raise a good point, because what I would love to see is, rather than, you know, the football analogy, I don't know, for those of you when my kids were younger, you know, it used to be so much fun watching them play football or soccer or whatever, you know, because they would all run after the ball. You know, no one's played in position, everybody ran after the ball. And I think we as an industry have to get better at not all running after the same ball, but complementing each other. So we don't do acid forms, but potentially somebody out there does do acid forms. So let's work together, you know, rather than us all chasing the same ball. But great question. Thank you. Yes, sir.
So, Bo Whitney, Whitney Economics. In the United States, the largest contributor to anti-cannabis reform legislation is Big Pharma.
Yeah.
I recently spoke at the Parliament in Ireland. Huge pharma presence. The doctors are, the medical program is fledgling because of the influence of Big Pharma.
Yeah.
One question is, why is Big Pharma so afraid of, and you know, we all know that this question, why is it so afraid of cannabis, but how can the cannabis industry kind of work with Big Pharma to develop stuff in parallel rather than being assumed to be a threat to the Big Pharma industry?
Wow, okay, so I'm going to answer that question in the next 30 minutes while you... You know what the short answer is? Big Pharma want to know two things. Is it safe? And number two, show me the evidence. And I think that's exactly what I was talking about. Now, we can maybe get into it in a little bit more detail in the panel conversation. But I think at the moment, rather than doing signaling studies or proof of concept studies or you know, trying to do real world evidence, pharma doesn't get engaged on that. They get engaged when you've got a solid pre-clin or phase 1, phase 2 clinical study. The evidence is there. It's shown to have a benefit over placebo or over current form. So I think for me, you know, I'm very comfortable with the fact that people need access to these medicines now. So that's where the medical cannabis per se is playing a role. But if we want to engage pharma and a broader populace of patients, then some of us have to start going, and it's a journey. You know, we know it takes about 10 years from molecule development through to an MA, a marketing authorization. But what I would say is we don't have to start even at drug discovery anymore, because there's so much evidence. Somebody asked me today, they said, Terry, what do you think of real world evidence? And I said to them, real world evidence in my old world never replaces a pivotal clinical study. But no clinical study should start without real-world evidence, because you want to minimize as much risk as you can. So I think it's complementary, but I think Big Pharma will get involved when we start to do the studies that show them that these are powerful therapeutics, and their pipelines are drying up. You know, so you know, I think they're waiting for us as an industry to up our game and do some of these studies.
Thank you so much. It was perfect.
And I overran.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's okay. Everybody's ready. One more time for Terry O'Regan.